I was asked if I could make a video about how to become a lawyer in Germany, or rather, how to undertake legal training. It's not my area of expertise, but anyone who'd like an overview of the laws in Germany, the training required to become a lawyer, and various professions within the legal and judicial sector in Germany is very welcome to watch.
Welcome to YD. Why do Germans do things the way they do?
As always, let's start with a bit of history. Ever since there have been cultures, rulers, and laws, there have also been people who are well versed in the law. Law has been one of the first subjects of study ever since universities came into existence. Even before that, law was taught at monastic schools, though not necessarily as a separate subject. Law has always been important to the church, both the law of the rulers and the church canon law. Even the concept of justice mentioned in the Old Testament, an eye for an eye, was a restrictive law that was already mentioned in Susa in the Code of Hammurabi. One was not allowed to demand more than the damage that had been inflicted. From the University of Bologna onwards, Roman law was taught from the 12th century onwards because it was regarded as exemplary. From 1385 it was possible to study canon law in Heidelberg, and from 1388 in Cologne. Roman law followed, and from 1392 Erfurt offered the first opportunity in German lands to complete a law degree. The nature of academic qualifications evolved over time. Initially, it was not the qualification itself that mattered, but the number of books one owned or had read on the subject. Later qualifications ranging from a master's degree to a doctorate were introduced. From 1750 onwards, Prussia introduced a requirement that for senior positions such as those in the courts, a period of public preparatory service, öffentlicher Vorbereitungsdienst, was necessary in addition to a completed law degree. This system developed from there and largely still exists in Germany today. However, even without a specific degree, one learns a great deal about the law whilst undergoing vocational training in Germany. During my apprenticeship, I learned a great deal about my rights and duties as an employee. During my basic training with the Bundeswehr, I learned about various laws that were important for ordinary soldiers at the time. I learned even more during my training to become a non-commissioned officer and squad leader. In the training courses, military law is a subject that is examined. I almost became a driving instructor with the Bundeswehr, which would have required in-depth knowledge of, amongst other things, road traffic law. During officer training, military law is covered once again, and this time the training is intensive and delivered by lawyers. As I was then working in a field dealing with transport, I had to focus particularly on the transport of dangerous goods by road. The ADR applies in this context. Later on, in my business studies degree, there was a module that covered contract law, property law, employment law, and a whole host of other topics. And since I've been advising HR departments on HR software, I've become familiar with even more legislation, such as the governing employment regulations, working hours, protection against unfair dismissal, the Youth Employment Protection Act, and when I was on the Works Council, the Works Constitution Act, Betriebsverfassungsgesetz as well. Then, as a parent or a member of the Jugendamtselternbeirat, Youth Welfare Office Parents Advisory Board, or the School Parents Association, you also learn about laws relating to childcare, kindergarten, schools, and co-determination. And I've also been involved in local politics, where there's a fair bit to know about planning law, environmental protection, public administration. Well, the list could go on and on and on. And although I certainly have a deeper understanding of these matters than many others, I'm not a lawyer, and unlike tax advisors and lawyers, I cannot make any legal binding statements. But let's now turn to the study of law as it is conducted in Germany today. There are a number of universities where you can study law. Some of them have a numerus clausus, meaning you need a particularly good A-level grades, but there are also universities with no entry restrictions. As I've already said, nobody usually cares where you completed your degree as long as you have the relevant qualification. To find out whether a particular university is particularly good, you'll need to ask someone who has studied there. The degree program consists of a Grundstudium, foundation stage, lasting 4 semesters or 2 years. This is where students acquire a basic understanding of civil, public, and criminal law. The foundation stage concludes with a written intermediate examination. This is followed by the Hauptstudium, main course of study, 6 semesters, during which the subjects from the foundation state are explored in greater depth, and further areas of law, such as procedural law, are introduced. Students must attend seminars on key skills or languages, this followed by a specialization in the area of focus. Now comes the slight challenge because there are 300 areas of specialization. That's right, 300 possible specializations. I hadn't imagined that either before doing my research. We might think of judges, prosecutors, and criminal defense lawyers, or a solicitor specializing in divorce law. But there are so many more specializations: international law, aviation law, inheritance law, employment law, copyright law, since we're on the subject of YouTube, and so on and so forth. When you reach the end of your 5-year degree, you face your first legal examination. Until a few years ago, this was still the first state exam, erstes Staatsexamen. Nowadays, however, the state authorities only determine 70% of the exam content, with the rest is set by the universities. Nevertheless, it remains a major hurdle that you have to successfully overcome. The next stage is the preparatory service or legal traineeship mentioned above. Over the next 2 years, law graduates must gain an understanding of day-to-day work in various settings. This may involve 3 months at a local or regional court, at a public prosecutor's office, at a government agency, or at various law firms. This is followed by the second state examination, comprising several written papers and an oral examination. The law degree program and the examination in particular are considered to be among the most difficult in Germany. Around 10% of first-year students drop out. Around 20% of those aiming to sit the first examination, formerly the first state examination, after 5 years fail, and around 12% also fail the second state examination following the 2-year legal trainingship. Nationwide, only around 15% of the graduate achieve a distinction with a mark of 9 or higher. However, they can then almost choose any job they like. It's important to note here that whilst you do have a degree by the end of your studies and may well be working in a company and drafting contracts, it is only upon successful passing the second state examination that you become a Volljurist, fully qualified lawyer, and can work as a solicitor, judge, prosecutor, or civil servant in the higher administrative service. Let's briefly return to the question of which book I might recommend. Well, it's not quite that simple. This is a page from a standard bookshop chain in Germany, and we can see that they already have 24 law books on offer. If I now switch to the website of Beck Verlag, a specialist publishing of legal books, we can see that I find 1,693 results from the term Gesetze, laws. That's just the state laws alone, and we have 16 federal states, each with their own parliaments or senates and their own state laws. And within these, we have a wide range of different specialist areas. If I now simply go to the website of the Federal Office of Justice, I find a good 130 German laws translated into English in the translation section. In 2025, there were 1,789 laws in force at federal level, one more than in 2024, and in addition, 2,897 Rechtsverordnungen, statutory instruments, a good 30 more than in 2024. And if I browse through a few pages of libraries at universities where you can study law, we've got a huge list of literature there. If I just have a look here at the new acquisitions for March 2026, that is only the new acquisition, books on the subject that weren't previously in the library, and also a list from February, it becomes difficult, particularly for an outsider, to make a recommendation. But I've found two websites that address precisely this topic: which books first-year students should buy. That said, they also point out that university libraries are well stocked and that online borrowing offers plenty of options. Apart from specialization, however, both sides agree that these three books provide a good foundation to start with. I myself had also some affordable books from this publisher during my time at a business school. All these laws are also available free of charge on the websites of the Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection. And some of them have even been translated, for example, the BGB, Bürgerliches Gesetzbuch, Civil Code, or the StGB, Strafgesetzbuch, Criminal Code. However, the books shown here also contain other laws, and of course, you should always have the most up-to-date edition. To return to the back website, in addition to the laws as they were enacted, there are, of course, commentaries on how the laws have been applied in the past and how they are to be interpreted. And there you'll find 3,200 works under the heading commentary, which works out at roughly 2 commentaries per code. So there's plenty to read. Incidentally, the duration and pass rates slightly depending on the federal states. In North Rhine-Westphalia, the average duration of study in 2021 was 9.4 semesters, whilst in Saarland it was 14.4 semesters. Incidentally, anyone who sits their first exam within the first 10 semesters and fails is given a free pass, Freischuss. It is treated as though they had not said it at all. The pass rates for the first exams are highest in Berlin and the Saarland, where around 80% pass, whilst in Bremen and Brandenburg over 35% fail. We have prepared for our degree successfully, completed the foundation stage and the main stage of our studies with one of the 300 specializations, and also successfully completed our legal traineeship and the second state examination. But what do I do with that? I can become a lawyer. To do so, I must apply for admission to the relevant local Rechtsanwaltskammer, Bar Association. There is a requirement to have a lawyer's office, Kanzleipflicht. So if I wish to set up in private practice, I must open a law firm, Kanzlei. However, I can also take up a position at an existing law firm or work as an in-house lawyer, Syndikusrechtsanwalt, for a company. Although there are 300 specializations covered during the degree program, there are only 24 specialist lawyer qualifications in Germany, and the lawyer may hold the title of no more than 3 specialist lawyer qualifications, Fachanwaltschaften. There must also be a period of at least 3 years between being admitted to the bar, remember, 5 years of study plus 2 years of legal training before applying for admission, and obtaining the first specialist lawyer qualification, or 10 years from the start of one's degree. If you've practiced as a lawyer for at least 5 years, including at least 3 years within the jurisdiction in which you want to apply to become a notary, you may sit the specialist examination to become a notary. If a notary post then becomes vacant, you can apply for it. As shown in this video on buying property, a notary is officially responsible for tasks such as preparing land registry entries and certifying documents. If you've passed the examination, depending on the federal state, with a mark of at least 8 points, a mark of 9 points or above constitutes as a distinction, are no older than 35 to 40 years of age, and have no criminal record, you may also apply to become a public prosecutor after passing the second state examination. There is a probationary period lasting several years during which one serves as a public prosecutor and judge and is subsequently appointed as a public prosecutor for life. Those wishing to become a judge face similar requirements. Also, the probatory periods last 5 years. Afterwards, one becomes a judge for life. Whether a judge, one might eventually become, for example, a judge at the Federal Constitutional Court, is a completely different matter. Nomination for such posts are put forward among the ranks of judges, and these are then voted on and decided by the Bundestag or the Bundesrat. The same applies in the individual federal states and their courts. You can watch a video about all the courts in Germany here. However, there are a few other professions that are important in this field, but for which you do not need to study law. Firstly, there are Rechtsanwaltsfachangestellte, legal assistants, who provide support in law firms, for example. They carry out a task expected of office administrators in businesses. They organize a practice, are familiar with the formalities and legal correspondence. Naturally, they are particularly discreet and must organize appointments and ensure that deadlines are met. If a written submission is not received by the court in time, this can have serious consequences for the client. They essentially do everything in the practice apart from providing legal advice and actually representing clients in court. As well as in law firms, you can also work in a specialist department of companies, banks, or insurance firms. The dual vocational training program lasts 3 years. Conversely, there are Justizfachangestellte, judicial clerks, who work in a similar capacity in courts or public prosecutors' offices. They provide support to judges and public prosecutors accordingly. The dual vocational training program lasts between 2.5 years and 3 years. Depending on the post, it is also possible to become a civil servant. Justizfachwirte, judicial specialist clerks, follow a similar path. They either join the profession as career changers with the training program mentioned above, or are trained within 2 years. One of their tasks, for example, is to make minutes of court proceedings. Court security is provided by Justizhelfer, court assistants, who often start as a career changer with a different vocational background. If they are to become civil servants, there is a further training course to become a Justizwachmeister, court constable. Gerichtsvollzieher, bailiffs, also have a different background. They may well be the aforementioned legal assistants or court clerks, but might also come from the banking or accounting sector. Rechtspfleger, judicial officers, on the other hand, undertake a degree program. In North Rhine-Westphalia, a dual study program at the University of Applied Science, so one only needs a vocational baccalaureate to subsequently take on duties in court, for example, in relation to auctions or court-appointed guardians. If they wish to progress further, judicial officers can train to become Amtsanwälte, assistant public prosecutors, who then assist public prosecutors in cases of petty crime. They can then represent the prosecution in court without being fully qualified lawyers. Fachkräfte des sozialen Dienstes, social service professionals, work in a completely different environment. They look after people who are experiencing difficulties following a criminal offense, whether they are the victims, the offender, or their relatives. To do this, one should have completed a degree in social work or social pedagogy. They can draw on reports on the social circumstances of those involved as part of the court-appointed assistance. They help to facilitate victim-offer mediation, and they take on the duties of Bewährungshelfer, probation officers, or work as gesetzliche Betreuer, statutory guardians. And whilst the work of the judiciary is carried out in the courts and public prosecutors' offices, lawyers themselves are active in a wide range of fields. In addition to law firms and companies, many associations and organizations have their own legal departments. A large proportion of politicians have studied law. Even in the German armed forces during overseas deployment, senior officers in the highest echelons of command are assisted by lawyers who assess the legal aspects of operations and decisions and support colonels and generals in their decision making. During overseas deployments, they can even take charge of the initial investigation into criminal offenses alongside specialists from the military police. By the way, if you'd like to find out more about police training, you will find a video here. I hope I've managed to give a good overview of the varied nature of law studies in Germany and the exams involved. At least 3 books have been recommended here that every first year law student should have. Now I'm curious to see how this commissioned video will be received. Remarks, additions, and comments in the comments. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.